Okay, so I guess my easy way out of being a real interviewer will be asking you, how would you introduce yourself? If
Wow,
someone asked you to describe yourself, what sorts of things would you be saying?
that is a great way of getting out of asking that question. I like that. Might steal that. How would I introduce myself? Hi, I'm Brock. I'm a dude that does things. Um, I don't know. I'm an occupational therapist. I'm a powerlifter. I run an OT podcast. I am a bit of a geek when it comes to like tech and that kind of thing. Especially obviously with the podcast, love audio gear and microphones and all that sort of stuff. I work at a university now. I am teaching. I've worked in mental health my whole career. Before that, what else? I don't know. What else is interesting? Probably not much. I consider myself to be a fairly boring human.
Well, I feel like we heard a few of your meaningful occupations from that
Yeah.
little spiel. So things like powerlifting, interest in working in mental health, could we say, since you have been, working, and then tech things as well as, so microphones, audio. So I feel like that's a little bit of a nice, well-rounded intro to you.
Sounds good. Yeah, sounds good to me. Sums me up.
As well as just being a lecturer and an occupational therapist. I think that's probably where I'll start with just an OT. So how, why, when OT? How did you kind of find yourself on this journey as an OT?
Yeah. So I started when I first went to university. I started doing engineering. Really didn't like that. There was a bit too much math for me, and so I was living on campus at the time in one of the colleges, and had kind of made up my mind that I don't want to do engineering. I need to find something else, and happened to be walking past a friend of mine's room. Completely coincidental. He was heavily intoxicated, playing guitar with a sock puppet on his hand, which he had made in class that day, studying OT. So not that night, but maybe the next day or a couple of days later, I had a chat with him about what this OT thing was. And he can't even remember exactly how he described it, but it obviously piqued my interest as something that I should look into, and potentially it's something that I could do as a career. And then, once I sort of had a bit of a look around and got a bit of information about it, I found out one of my old family friends was actually an OT. Had a chat with her about the types of things she does, and I went, yeah, okay, that sounds pretty cool. So transferred into OT because of my mate's sock puppet.
So you were saying you were in engineering before, were there sorts of things that you were looking for when when finding a profession? Were you wanting something that was going to challenge you, something working with people? Were there kind of criteria that you had in your mind?
Subconsciously maybe, but nothing conscious. I think engineering initially, when I chose that, was just I don't know, I like building things, and in my head it was like, I'm going to build buildings and build bridges and typical building stuff, which turns out that's only a small part of it anyway. But obviously when I chose OT, it was probably more the fact that I wanted to get as far away from engineering as possible more than anything else. But on reflection afterwards, like I had a want to help people, and I'd like, once I'd sort of started actually looking at it as an option, because for years, like, I was going to be an engineer, that was it. And I think once I'd started looking at health-related professions as an option, I sort of went, like, this kind of resonates with me. I would like to help people, and I would like to, work in a profession that is widely recognized, and I can work wherever I want, kind of thing. I can travel if I wanted to, that kind of thing. I tend to get bored easily, so a broad profession that I can change and flip around is a good thing for me, anyway.
Yeah, you're definitely in a good profession for chopping and changing and the ability to travel. Have you ever worked overseas as an OT?
No, initially I was like, yeah, that sounds amazing, but I don't know, the travel thing never really bit me. It doesn't. I've worked in other various districts around Australia or around Queensland, but yeah, not overseas. It just never floated my boat. I know lots of people I graduated with that did, but yeah, it just wasn't my thing.
And so far, have you found that OT has fulfilled all the things you'd like to achieve or look for within a fulfilling career?
Definitely, probably all that and then some. I think my expectations initially were so I want to help people. They were so sort of small and broad that it couldn't help but I could probably fulfill that at Macca's or something like that. But I think finding OT for me was kind of a really good mix of some of the other things that I probably wasn't even aware of that I needed in a profession, in that I need to be challenged and I need to be constantly learning and constantly growing. And that's probably why I get bored so easily when things just sort of stagnate. And that's why for OT as a profession for me, I didn't know it at the time. I can look at it now in hindsight, but it really fit me almost too perfectly.
That's awesome to actually hear that. Yeah, because I think that is really a selling point for me whenever I'm talking to someone about OT or they're considering coming into OT. It's always they have quite specific, or sometimes have quite specific expectations or an outlook of what OT might be. But I always start with, it is so broad. Whatever I say now is not going to even touch the surface of all the things that we can do or all the places and settings that you'll find us in, because there's probably so many jobs and fields that I'm not even aware of yet, and that perhaps you aren't even aware of yet, because we are, starting to emerge in different settings and with different client populations. And that I really think so many people would be able to find their little niche within OT. Definitely. It could suit so many different people.
Definitely. And I think that's a two-edged sword, though. So I do think that it could suit a lot of people, but I don't know. It definitely doesn't suit everyone, I don't think. Well, actually, that's a lie. I think anyone can do it, but I think it takes a certain person to do it really well, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's certain personality traits that are attracted to OT, and I think there are certain probably life skills and that sort of stuff even before they do their degree that quite often will either bloom or grow within the course whilst they're becoming an OT. That I think that's the sort of thing that separates an OT from an OT.
I think that's actually a topic that I'd like to talk to you further about, is if you didn't already know,
my soapbox
is considering the types of people, or if there is a type of person that would best suit our profession, with obvious acknowledgement that the field is so broad and that there's different skills and interests that would suit the little niches that we have. But off the top of my head, when I think of OTs, we're in a lot of cases problem solvers and need to be creative in what we do. Mm-hmm. So to me, those are some skills or areas that maybe someone wants to improve in that would be quite beneficial whilst being an OT.
Definitely, I completely agree with that. And I think even looking at so even looking at the like where a lot of my friends that I graduated with ended up and comparing their personality traits. So like a lot of the guys that were very analytical and very structured would end up in roles that were that. They might work in insurance, or they might work in mine sites and that kind of stuff, where it's very regimented, it's very structured, it's very, they have control over what they're doing, that kind of thing. A lot of people that were looking for change and looking, a lot of the people that in my experience, were more like looking or enjoyed exploring narratives, sort of that qualitative aspect of OT. A lot of them ended up in mental health. I would love to see if anyone has actually researched. Like, I reckon you could almost predict like where people are gonna like enjoy working field wise, just be from the personality traits that they bring into it. But I do think there are some overall ones. OTs are generally caring. OTs are generally. I'm saying, when I say OTs, I mean good OTs are generally good communicators. Doesn't matter what field we're in, we're usually good communicators. There's also some personality traits that aren't good ones that end up like as part of OT. Like, I think OT as a profession, we're not a very assertive profession. I think there's definitely room to grow. I think a lot of the personality traits that draw or are drawn to OT are traditionally held by women in a lot of cases. It's a lot of like caring roles and wanting to help, and some of that problem solving and supporting, and those kinds of personality traits, which aren't exclusively women. Obviously, I'm not a woman, but traditionally, and that's probably just due to where the profession was birthed. It was birthed in nursing, which at the time was, I don't know if there was any male nurses back then. It may have been, but they would have been very, very rare. And I think over time, that's where we've evolved to, and that's, I think, a lot of the reason why we see such a small percentage of guys in the profession is because the profession itself has evolved to best fit, based on the workplaces that we're in, some of the personality traits that are probably not as often held by men.
Do you think that if our profession was more widely understood or known, even in a more general, broad sense, that maybe there would be more interest from men entering into the profession? Or do you think that's separate?
No, I think, again, two-edged sword. And I've said this before and got myself in trouble, but I'm happy to say it again. So I think, definitely, if there's more exposure to the profession and people like the profession itself is more visible, people are understanding it better. Like, by people, I mean general public. I think you're going to get more of everyone to the profession, which, you compare the percentage of male and female in general population to what's in the profession, you're going to end up with more guys. It might not be 50-50, but you might end up with more males in the profession. The thing that I have been in trouble with is that I'm not saying whether that's a good or bad thing, but we need to be aware that if that happens, it changes the core values not the core values, but the cultural values of the profession. The profession itself is a culture. The culture is just a group of shared values. And if we change the makeup of that profession, so say, like at the moment, worldwide, I think it's about 8% male. Let's say we double that and it becomes 60%. That's a bigger percentage of people who may have, say, more traditionally male type personality traits. That's going to change the profession as a whole. It's the same as if you add too much chlorine to the pool becomes much saltier. Like, you could double it and it might only be a small percentage compared to the water, but it still changes how the pool's made up, kind of thing. Like I said, I'm not saying that's a good or bad thing. I don't know. But it's just something I think a lot of people, I see the argument a lot, like, we need more males, or we need more this, or we need more that. And I'm like, that's cool. And like, I am a guy. I'm not arguing either. I'd love to see more guys in OT, but I just think we need to be aware that I don't think we just need any guys. I would love to see more guys, or it promoted to people so that we attracted more guys that already fit, what the profession's looking for, as opposed to just bringing any old Joe Blow in here and the profession itself changing. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I never want it to be just meeting quotas or making us look like we're being more diverse. It's still, you're still wanting the type of equality of person to be joining the profession. But I think, that's a really interesting point about us being aware if we're interested in this happening, interested in us becoming more diverse in relation to gender, that this has the potential to be actually changing our culture worldwide or wherever this change might happen. And
it might be for the better. Who knows? But we don't.
Yeah.
So it's like, how can we, if we like the way the profession itself is, or the cultural values of this OT profession that we're in now, like, how can we attract more people? And that's why I even though I am a guy and I am the minority, I get kind of not annoyed, but it bugs me when we start looking at OT as categories, like, we're only 8% guys and then 90% female. Like, if you look, I firmly believe if we looked at professions by things like personality traits instead, you would see a much different breakdown of the profession. It'd be like, 99% of OTs have this caring personality trait. They want to help people. They, some of them may have had a personal experience with an OT, that kind of thing, like, as opposed to male, female. Because in the grand scheme of things, I personally don't feel that makes as big a difference as having some of those personality traits that are going to make you a really good therapist.
I agree that at the end of the day, it's the person's personality that's what should count. But I guess there is that argument of maybe not within OT, but maybe it is there, of representation, of maybe if there was a higher percentage of men in the profession, we would have different perspectives or different opinions and different conclusions, or problem solving, different solutions could come up. But you never know until you have that opportunity.
Yeah, and we definitely would. I just, like I said, I don't know whether that would be a good thing or a bad thing. And it's one of those things that, like, once it happened, that it happened. Like, you can't, like, go, okay, no, this didn't work. Kick him out.
Had enough of you. All right, back to normal.
Like, to me, I'm like, if we want more, like, I don't care about male, female. Like, I want more good OTs. So, like, how can we promote two people that are gonna fit the bill to be good OTs? Like, I'd love to see someone do some research around that. Like, how can we? And yes, so in the end, if we do that and it turns out like, okay, sweet, now there's 15% guys, sweet, so be it. But in the end, we've got more good OTs, male, female, goat, doesn't matter. Like, we've got some good OTs.
I wonder, I've had an experience somewhat recently where a client has moved purposefully to a male OT because their family felt that maybe they'd be able to, well, I only saw them once, but build more rapport or listen to a male OT better. So this was boys. So I wonder if there is maybe therapeutic benefits to having more diversity in us. People can relate to each other, relate to their clients.
I think that definitely could be. I think a lot of that is often seen in an older generation, where, like, I've worked with older people, like older guys, that have been referred to me, like, from a female therapist, because when that, however, he's like 80 or 90 or something, when he was sort of growing up, it was like, females can't, well, they don't work, they don't do this, so how could you possibly be any good at your job? So, like, there's that sort of generational idea, which is probably the experience I've had most with people preferring one sex over the other. But there's also, like, I know there's some religions where people, don't like to talk or don't like to talk about like intimate details, like medical things, with someone of the opposite sex, and that's cool. Like I get that, and I get how having more guys in those instances, or at least having access to guys, or girls, vice versa, would benefit it.
But is it a big enough reason for us to pursue it? Yeah.
I think in a way I'm a little bit sheltered from that because I haven't seen the stats, but just in my experience, there's probably more guys of the small amount of guys in OT. There's probably more of them working in mental health than in any other area. So we are probably split. Like in mental health, it might be 20% male if you just looked at mental health needs. And I don't think I've ever been in a team where there wasn't another guy. Maybe once. So I think, yeah, I have seen it happen, but I've never seen it where the barrier hasn't been able to. And I guarantee it does happen. I just haven't exposure to it. And I don't know. And because of that, I don't know how often it happens. Like, is it overall, I've probably seen it only happen maybe 3 or 4 times in my career. Like, I don't know if any other areas that may have, less guys, it might be all women on a team sort of thing, whether they see it more than, I have in mental health. Not sure. But yeah, I in my experience in mental health, I haven't seen it as like a massive barrier to practice.
Yeah, it hasn't, personally from my experience, my short-term experience in pediatrics, it hasn't appeared to be a barrier. It was only maybe 1 or 2 experiences where families wanted to try and see if maybe a male role model in their life could produce more motivation or relatability, if that's a word, to the child. And I was totally for them trying that, absolutely, if that could help them reach their goals, absolutely. Took no offense to it.
Obviously not like I can't work with this person. Like there is a preference thing. Like maybe, again, that comes down to the personality trait things. Like maybe a male could relate to this kid better, for whatever reason, childhood reasons or whatever it is. But I've always worked in an area where even if there wasn't a male OT in my team, like there was someone that we could tap into to support that person or try that theory out or whatnot. Like, yeah, I've never come across a time when we haven't been.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're right.
I was holding it in for a long time. I can do it. So sorry, what were you saying?
No, you're right. I was just saying I've never come across anywhere where we haven't been able to accommodate those needs. Like, yes, there's fewer in the instance of guys and girls. There's fewer guys, but there's always like at least one kind of thing.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to kind of, see the actual stats on what fields we all tend to go to and the percentages. Yeah. Well, have you noticed a shift amongst the demographics since joining the OT space, or has it always kind of been constant for you, that percentage?
I think it was like worldwide, like 7 or 8% when I finished, and it's still about that. I don't think it's shifted much. Like I said, I am a little bit sheltered from it because I do believe that there's probably more males working in mental health than anywhere else, and I've always been in mental health, so I've probably been around more of the male OT cohort than some of the people that work in physical rehab or on hospital wards, that kind of thing. So, but yeah, I haven't noticed any shift in those particular stats since I graduated anyway.
What drew you to work in mental health and kept you there, it sounds like?
When I was at uni, I had like zero interest in it. I really didn't even know what OT did in mental health. When I was at uni, when I was going through uni, like I was going to work in equipment. I was going to help design equipment and, prescribe and adjust and adapt equipment. Like that was my jam. And then when it came to placements, I had a friend who was the year above me that went and did a mental health placement. He was like me beforehand. He was like no interest in it. I can't even remember what he had on, but it definitely wasn't mental health. And he did a placement, and he came back from that placement, and just it changed his mind. Like he was mental health. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting because we're pretty close. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to do that. I'm going to try this, and I ended up getting exactly the same placement that he did. And I don't know whether it was specifically that placement or whether it was just like being exposed to OT and mental health, but I just fell in love with it, and I came away from that placement. Like that was back then, it was 14 weeks. So what's that, 3.5 months? And I wasn't going to work anywhere else. I'm like, that's it, I'm done. Like I'm sold. Like, you've got me. And yeah, I don't know exactly what it is. I think at the time anyway, my limited exposure through placements and that kind of thing, a lot of the placements were kind of like you were only doing like this little part of OT, and mental health was like you're doing everything. And I think that's what I loved. And I think it was very much to that in mental health compared to my placements anyway, like we were out and about doing stuff with people as opposed to just like prescribing equipment or filling out checklists and supporting them to do paperwork and all that sort of like stuff, which is still, it's important and people still need to learn those skills. But I think the freedom and a little bit of more autonomy that I experienced within mental health really drew. Like autonomy is a big thing for me, still is. And I think seeing that and getting that with mental health, it's told me. That's it. I was done. Forget equipment. I'm going to mental health.
That's really awesome to hear, because I feel like a lot of people I speak to, especially going through our course, are sometimes afraid, or even if they haven't had any experience in the practice setting of mental health, they're just like, I just know that's not something I'd be interested in. But I feel like it would be so beneficial for all of us. I know we do courses on it, but to have even just some placement experience in it, because mental health is relevant with whoever you're treating, with whatever field you're in. It's always there, and it should always be on your mind when you're considering your clients. So it's not something you can escape.
I spoke to an OT in the States not long ago called Eric. He's Army OT, but one of his sayings was there's no physical health without mental health. So he's like, even like the time he was in the Army, so he was working in like physical rehab with people who got injured in war, like severe injuries. And he was like, we were talking about how he would like address their mental health, like while they're on a physical rehab ward, and that was his thing, like no physical health without mental health, and that resonated with me because I'm like, it's so true. It's like, every OT should be looking at mental health, and some of us specialize in it. Like that's the way it should be. Same as like, I can look at someone and if something's not right physically, and I don't specialize in it, but I can at least see that something's not right, or they're not able to, using activity analysis, that kind of stuff, not able to perform said occupation because of something physical. And I might not be the best person to treat it, but I can still recognize it, and then I can get the help from the people that are the experts in that area. So it can work vice versa as well.
Absolutely. And if someone was to ask you, because I often find people are even OTs are still confused as what our role is in mental health. How do you like to define or overview our role as OTs within mental health?
I have a very, I kind of define OT as a whole, and then it kind of makes sense. Like, well, actually, I define occupation really, because I think that's the bit that tricks people up. That's the bit they don't understand.
That's where I like to start too, defining occupation.
And that's it. Like, so I'd explain to someone, like when we're assuming it's general public, like when we talk about occupation, we're talking about things that occupy your time, not your job and that sort of stuff. So we work with people when there's injury or illness that impedes them from doing those things that they like to occupy their time with. And, that could be car accident or stroke or things like schizophrenia or depression or, these things also get in the way and they stop people from doing the things that they love to do or they need to do to occupy their time. So that's what we work with. We work with building structures, building resilience, building coping mechanisms, transitioning through like an occupational transition period of, going through a psychiatric hospital, getting a new job, moving house, like all of these things that have a big impact on people's mental health. Even just adjusting to taking medication can be a big step for some people. Like these are the everyday things that can be affected by a mental health diagnosis or by the medication itself. So I think, again, coming back to what I was enjoying about mental health, like even the actual, not that this is a good thing, but even sometimes the actual conditions, it affects everything in someone's life. Like I do a podcast, and I did a podcast with a lady not long ago who has schizophrenia about her experience of actually having schizophrenia. And that was what she said. She's like, we were actually talking about identity at the time, and she was like, I identify as a schizophrenic, which is a word that a lot of health professionals have been told not to use. And her reasoning for that is like, it's part of me. Like it affects everything I do, whether I'm going to sleep or whether I'm trying to get out of bed or going to work, or she also runs a YouTube channel, so whether she's making videos for that, like her schizophrenia is a part of that. So to me, that resonated on how big an impact some of these diagnoses or mental health conditions can have on someone's life, as opposed to, I got a leg injury or I got an arm injury or I had a stroke. And yes, that's going to have a massive impact on people, but there's probably still going to be some occupations that aren't affected, even if they're tiny. Whereas the thing with mental health is severe injury mental health, there's probably not going to be many that aren't affected at all. So we can work with everything that people do to occupy their time. I think that diversity appeals to me.
Do you think there's particular skills or personality traits that are maybe more important if you're going to be working in mental health for us as clinicians to have or be aware of?
I don't know if I can rank them as more important or less important, but I think there are definitely things that are important to at least have or be working on. Things like your own coping mechanisms and your own resilience, massive. If you don't have that, you're not going to last very long in mental health. It is a very, we work with people quite often when they're at their lowest or at their worst, and by supporting them, we're often taking on their burden for a short period of time and trying to, have a look where we can make some progress through that, so that then we can support them to take that path out of, whatever darkness they may be in at the time. That takes a toll on us if we don't look after ourselves and if we don't have good coping mechanisms. I think some of the other stuff, which isn't necessarily required for every clinician, but in my experience, I think it's more important that you have a set of skills within a team. So like for some people, it is like the really calm, supportive, almost like motherly type role. For some people, it's, the hard word and being able to be very assertive. Quite often those two personality traits don't cross over in one person. But if you've got someone with both, or like different people with both in a team, then the team can utilize that skill set as a strength. Because it's highly unlikely that you're going to end up with both in the one human. That would be an amazing human, and I'd love to meet them. So, because there's times when the people we work with might need that more loving support, softer side, and there's times when, it's time to put the hammer down and get stuff done. Like that's the reality of it. So being able to work as a team, and utilize other people's strengths is a massive thing. Being able to recognize people's strengths and then utilize strengths is probably a really good skill set, I'd say, for people to have, including your own. Be able to recognize your own.
No, I think that's a really important thing. Excuse me. And I definitely relate to when I've felt most comfortable and confident in my roles in mental health settings. It's been when I've had or been a part of a supportive team that I feel like, number one, has my back, number two, respects my input and is willing to, you know, collaborate and bounce ideas off each other. It's not just it's my way or no way at all. That open to OT input has always made me feel more comfortable in mental health settings.
Yeah, definitely. And that aspect of it too is important with like the leadership, like the team leader and that kind of stuff. Even though they're not, they might be depending on your team, but quite often they're not like on the ground working clinically with consumers as well. But it's important to have, you know, support and feel supported from the top down as well as by the team that you're working side by side with.
Was there ever any other field? Oh yeah, you said about the equipment prescription and that designing. Do you find that your interests and even your experiences in engineering while studying, has that ever come up or been useful so far in your career?
Probably not the skill set itself. I think sometimes the practicality of myself. I'm very sort of logical, structured kind of thinker, which I think is why I was drawn to, you know, engineering type profession in the first place. I think that definitely has played a part, and I've been able to relate to certain people that I've worked with better because of that's how I think, and maybe that's how they think as well. I've been able to probably, I think, learn a lot of like new concepts throughout my career because I've been able to sort of kind of logically break them down and fit them into what I already know a bit easier. So I think probably more the personality traits that drew me to engineering have been useful as opposed to the direct skill set that I learned while I was there.
I've had a few people ask me, I think it must be in America or here, I guess, if you're doing OT as a master's, they often ask, what should I be doing as my undergraduate, or what do you recommend having a background in? And I usually say, like, I don't, unless there's a requirement at the university, that sure, there are some professions that might have some crossover things that could be beneficial, like education, psychology, but things like music or television, film production, I think there's always going to be some benefit from people coming from quite diverse backgrounds into OT. Do you have any opinions on that topic?
No, I definitely agree. Like I've spoken to a lot of people who have done like a whole range of like different undergrads. I've spoken to people that have done like not classical dance, but like dance at university. I've spoken to people that have done psychology. One of my good mates has done like exercise science, but I've never seen any kind of pattern where I'm like, wow, that degree is really like making some kick-ass OTs kind of thing. And I think it's because as OTs, we kind of like those original degrees are probably chosen out of the person's interests, the person's passions, and that kind of thing. And I think as OTs, that is what can make a really good OT. If you're able to incorporate, you know, something that you're really passionate about or something that you really love into your clinical profession, like that beats the hell out of, you know, tick and flick forms that you don't really care about for the rest of your life. Like that's amazing. Like you're gonna be an amazing OT. So yeah, I've never seen any particular. I know a really popular one in America is kinesiology. I don't think it holds any particular benefit over doing science or dance or anything like that when it comes to the quality of the OT that comes out at the end. Like if I was going to go back, if I had to do an undergrad first now, knowing what I know now, it'd probably be something like sociology because that sort of stuff really interests me from an occupational point of view. But yeah, again, not well, a little bit to do with OT and from a theoretical point of view, but not anything directly. Like I wouldn't be doing, I don't know, there's not really anything similar to OT. But I don't know. I know I think in America too now, and I could be wrong, but they're at least trying to make their OTA program a bachelor's.
I was about to talk to you about that. Yep.
I don't know if it's there yet or if they're just trying to. But I suspect if they do make that a bachelor's program, then that's going to be a massive, I guess, pathway into the profession for a lot of people.
I remember you, I don't know if I remember her name, but one of your episodes, was it Leah, interviewing her? She was talking about, she was doing the OTA program at
she was an OTA,
and now she's doing OT. Yeah. And I remember listening to that and just going, that's so strange that, to me, the idea of an OTA basically doing arguably half the role of an OT, because she was saying the OT implements the therapy, implements the intervention plans.
Assessment and
the
OT does all the assessment and evaluation and that kind of stuff, and then the OTA essentially runs the program that the OT sets out.
Is OTA just doing the fun bits? Like
that's her words.
Yeah, it was like as much as I love assessing people, how do you feel about that? And what are your thoughts if Australia was thinking about implementing that? I know we do have allied health assistants here and OT assistants here, but it's not as big of
that model.
It's quite different.
Like I can understand, like after now having a look at the history of them and hearing a bit about them, like I can kind of understand how they got to that point and why they're using that model. I don't think that model would actually fit in Australia because we have a very different healthcare system. Like I think a lot of that was born because they have a very insurance-based healthcare system, whereas we have free healthcare in Australia. So there's not the reliance on the bottom dollar kind of thing in Australia. And I know that there's going to be people going, oh, they're always cracking up about we've got no money. I understand that, but it's usually after the fact. It's not at the detriment of not giving someone a service. Service will be given and then we'll whinge about how much it costs. In America, if they don't have the money, they don't get the service. The insurance-based system works. So I don't actually think that model would roll out in Australia. It just wouldn't work with our healthcare system. Now, if our healthcare system changed, like I know we've got NDIS, which is an insurance-based healthcare model similar to the States. It's a government-based insurance model, so it's slightly different. It's not a privatized sort of thing, but with the reliance on money before service of that model, I could see that OTAs could potentially, fit in with that particular healthcare model. And again, that's only one small aspect of Australia's overall health, but I could see them fitting it. Whether I think it's a good thing or not. I think the issue would be qualification, because I think in Australia we're kind of regimented with our payroll system, with our enterprise bargaining agreements in a lot of ways. So to get the same pay as an OT, the OTA would have to be a bachelor's. If OTA is a bachelor's, they're going to push OT up and we'll end up going the way that America does anyway. If the issue with it, in my state anyway, where the enterprise bargaining that I actually know fairly well, if they weren't a bachelor's, their pay would be drastically lower than a and I don't know. I don't actually think it would be that appealing to people from an employability standpoint. I don't know what the pay difference is in the States between an OT or OTR. I think they're OT registered. I'm not sure, but I just know from the EB agreements that we have in my state, at least, I don't actually know how appealing it would be to work, even doing the same sort of workload model as the States uses for that amount of money. Especially when OT is still a fairly accessible profession in that it's still only a bachelor's in Australia. So you don't have to do a bachelor's and then a master's, or a bachelor's and then a doctorate, or that kind of thing. So, if you had to do a bachelor's in OTA, but to be an OT was still a bachelor's, even if it was a 3-year bachelor's for OTA and a 4-year bachelor's for OT like it is now, it'd be worth the extra year just for the...
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it wouldn't make sense.
I don't know from an economical point of view if that model would roll out. If it rolled out with a different model, even just from a workload point of view, I think I don't like it. Maybe I'm just old and grumpy, like change. But I think some of the other issues I see with the States model is that the OTA, then anything they do is signed off by the OT. So any mistake they make is then on the OT's head, like for their registration. Like their registration is dependent on the OT's registration. And yeah, that's not a happy thought. We look at other healthcare professions and the amount of stress they have over responsibility, and we just add more to ourselves. And if that was the case, I'd be like, no thanks, I'll do it myself, and then I know it's done to my standard, etc. So I don't know, I can see it having a lot of barriers, and I think when it rolled out in the States, there was a massive shortage of OTs to be able to service. I can't remember the practice area that it rolled out for, but it rolled out at a time when they needed it, and now, like, it's one of those things. Once it's rolled out, you can't sort of roll it back. So I don't think we've got so many OT schools in Australia. I hit a shortage that large that we need to introduce another profession. I couldn't see it rolling out, but if it did, it would have to be very different for me to like it.
Well, are there things that you would like to see us head towards or integrate into our professional change?
Oh, that's a big question.
It's a loaded question.
It's a very loaded question. The one thing that I've really loved, and I don't know how you could ever change the profession to do it, but it might just be a matter of starting really small. I had a chat, I did a podcast, and again, she did a keynote at our conference with Professor Gail Whiteford, and one of the things that she talked about in both was that she would really love to see the profession broken down differently. So at the moment, you work in mental health, you work in physical, you work in peds, you work in geriatrics. What she proposed would be that we have our own specialties as opposed to trying to fit into medical model specialties, which is generally age groups. Our own specialties would be things like, so I might be an expert in occupational transition. Someone else might be an expert in occupational deprivation. So that we're setting our own, like she compares it to law. So you might work in family law or criminal law, like where you can work with anyone as long as it's their special, like that's the specialty. Like us setting our own specialties would be something I think would just be amazing, because I could imagine, like, for example, me, because my interest is occupational transition, so me working as an expert in occupational transition, but being able to work with anyone, but working through transitions and building resilience and transversing those gaps with people and supporting them to do so. There might be someone whose especially is occupational justice. So they work with refugees or people in secure units, or anyone who's experiencing occupational injustice. It doesn't matter that they're adult, kid, grandma, dog, goat, whatever. That's our specialty. We're setting our own specialties. And I just, as soon as she said it to me, I'm like, that's just blowing my mind, and it hasn't left my mind since we spoke about it in like December last year. And then she mentioned it again in her keynote at the Australian conference 2 weeks ago, and it's still, I'm like, this is still the greatest idea I think I've ever heard for essentially reordering the whole profession. Again, I don't know how you do that. I don't know. But in my head, I'm like, I'm going to do some research and aim my career at setting myself up as an expert in occupational transitions. It doesn't need to be, yes, okay, it might be mental health, but it doesn't have to be. I can look at occupational transitions in any area. That's what I want to do. So it kind of almost gave me career advice from a podcast and a keynote. So, but that is probably the one. If I could snap my fingers overnight and change anything, I'd love to see that. Because I think that, again, with that comes amazing occupational identity.
Mm-hmm.
And we no longer have that issue where, oh, what do we do? Well, I help people when they're going through an occupational transition, or I help people when they're experiencing occupational deprivation, or I help people and support people when they're experiencing occupational injustice. That's it. Like, occupation then becomes, again, more spoken about because it's in the name of the specialty. So the exposure to the general public is much greater as well. So yeah, if I could snap my fingers overnight, that's what I'd change.
That's, yeah, my mind is a little like, whoa, never thought of it like that. And then I went straight to how potentially messy it could be, but focusing back in, on the concept, that's powerful.
I think it would only be messy if we were still trying to fit within that medical model.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, the clash with the medical.
I think the issue, I think what we would need to do is just cut ties and start fresh, which again won't happen, but I would love to see it. We're not a medical model profession. We're not.
No, we're not. So you've said that you've carried that with you for a little while now. Has that influenced your teaching at all, your lecturing? Have you brought it up, raised it with students?
Not that particular idea. Obviously, I talk about occupational transitions and how they fit, especially I teach a mental health subject, well, starting next week. And during that subject, we discuss occupational transitions with regards to, the emotional and affective impact that it can have on people. So the mental health impact that those transitions have on people. And they can be transitions that we know about, like retirement. Like, there's a much higher instances of mental health diagnoses during some of those transitions, like adolescence, like transitioning from high school to uni, like transitioning from primary school to high school, like retirement, like any of those really predictable transitions also have a much higher impact of mental health issues. Why? So that's where I'm kind of like, well, okay, I can see a very obvious pattern here. And it's highlighted, in other professions. It's highlighted in the KPIs that we use. Like, we need to see people once they're discharged from hospital within 7 days because that's the highest risk. Why? That's a transition period. Going from hospital to home, that's a transition. So I discuss with them from that point of view, but I haven't yet. Maybe I will. The idea of just reordering the whole
maybe as fourth years, so they've learned everything and then just flip them upside down. What would happen if?
I do like doing that. That is fun.
How did you get into the academia side of things?
By accident? No. I was looking for a new opportunity. I was actually looking for a new clinical opportunity. I was on leave at the time and the job came up. I kind of always thought I wanted to be in academia at some point during my career, but it definitely wasn't expecting to do it this early. But yeah, the job was there. I was looking. I'm like, stuff it. Let's have a crack. What's the worst that happen? So, started off just doing some casual tutoring at the uni while I was on leave, and then the permanent job came up a couple of years ago, and went, let's have a crack. Let's see where this takes us. Why not?
And do you have, as someone who's interested in perhaps entering into that world later in my career, do you have any advice for people wanting to transition or considering the transition? Do you feel like there's benefits, negatives for us to be aware of?
There's definitely benefits and there's definitely negatives, same as any transition to any job. I think there's definitely aspects of it that most people don't think about, like marking.
Mm-hmm.
People are like, oh, they forget about that. And, you know, those little lumps of stress and hell that you go through in between all the fun times actually delivering content and teaching classes. I think a good way to do it would have been not necessarily take leave, but similar to what I did in that the casual tutoring sort of gave me a taste of, I guess, almost half the workload. I guess I had a little bit of marking, but it was mainly just the delivery. It wasn't about developing content. So I kind of got a taste of some of the workload by doing a little bit of casual tutoring. I'd already done for years. I was going in there and doing guest lectures on books and that sort of stuff. So I didn't have any hang-ups around public speaking or that kind of thing, which I know some people have. I know some people that did, who started around the same time as me. And I think I love and I want to learn and continue, because they're obviously always pushing people to study and learn and pursue, you know, PhD kind of thing. So if that's already on your agenda and, you know, you want to even eventually like do a PhD, then, you know, start making a plan, start working towards it. Even if you do, you know, some kind of study like a grad cert in research or something in the meantime, that might help sort of realize whether or not that's going to be the world for you. So yeah, there's going to be ups and downs again, and they're going to be different at every uni as well. And again, like most clinical roles, it's very dependent on your team. So if you've got a good team, you're going to be much happier than, say, if the team's not as functional. So yeah, I don't think it's anything specific. I'd say try and get some experience in it, even if it's just sort of casual and one-off stuff. And yes, if you do have that desire to do some study, then start. There's always little things you can start doing now.
Absolutely. I think they encourage us to maintain our contact with uni and reaching out. And yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you, Brooke, so much for being my first interviewee. I wanted to end with something short and simple, hopefully simple. If you had to describe OT in 3 words, what words would you choose? It doesn't have to form some kind of sentence. They can be separate.
3 words. I would say, oh, that is hard.
Doesn't need to be groundbreaking.
I got too many words in my head. That's the issue. Describing OT. Okay, OT to me. Describing OT. I would say versatile. I would say occupying. And I would say, oh, that's a tricky one. I don't know. Amazing.
No, I like. So what was it? Versatile, occupying, amazing, occupying and versatile. No, I can't put it in a better order. I was like, maybe it'll flow.
Weave it together somehow, like
I'm sure someone will be able to. Well, where can everyone find you online? What are all your platforms?
I'm pretty much everywhere. I'm fairly easy to find. Probably the easiest place is if you go to brockcook.com. That I think should have all of my social medias. It's got my Occupied podcast. It's got some, what else is on there? Random reflections that I've written. It's got some occupational musings and fun, sort of, not fun, but well, they are fun to me. Occupational related, like quotes and posters and stuff. Yeah. I'm on Twitter. It's Brock Cook OT. I'm on Facebook. I run MH for OT, which is a mental health group on Facebook. I'm also Occupied Podcast is on Instagram as well at just Occupied Podcast. And that's probably most places. But yeah, I'm pretty easy to find. More than happy if people want to email me. It's just brock.cook@me.com. Yeah, other than that, that's me.
Well, thank you again. I really appreciate you taking the time to let me talk at you and talk back to me.
That's how a conversation works.
Yeah.
Pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me.
No worries.